I'm delighted to speak on this legislation that is coming before the House at this point of time, the Personal Insolvency Bill 2012. It represents a significant step forward in our efforts to deal with personal debts. The financial turmoil of recent years has resulted in too many people facing debts that they are never likely to be able to repay. Most people are agreed that the legislation is draconian and offers little opportunity for people to escape these crushing debts. I very much welcome the introduction of this legislation, which will provide a comprehensive reform of insolvency law and offer new and more flexible options to address the circumstances of insolvent debtors. And I suppose at the outset it's important to say a word about the context that, for over the last number of years we have spent an awful lot of time in this House dealing with the fallout from what was described as the glory years of the Celtic Tiger. It was a very brutal animal indeed and left a huge trail of destruction behind it. And we've been picking up the pieces ever since. And there's no doubt about it, it caused more damage than benefit. It is good to see today the improvement in the state's finances, the fact that the economy improved by 2011 from the 0.7% expected to 1.4%, double what was the expectation, and we hope that continues on into the future. But of course, the other statistic we have at the present time is that we have the Troika in town, the European Union, the IMF, the ECB. They are here in situ and have been here for the last 18 months to 2 years will be the next time. And we are now completing our seventh examination by the Troika as to whether or not we are dealing with our finances in an adequate fashion, how we're dealing with our debts, our banking debts, how we're dealing with our own mortgage arrears, how we're dealing with the economy, whether or not the fairly harsh road that we have had to embark upon is being trodden on carefully and diligently. And all of that, of course, when we look to the bottom of it, is about people and about people's lives that have been damaged, that have been destroyed in one way or another, people who are in arrears of mortgage, people who are unemployed, people whose daily income has dropped considerably. And this is what we have been doing over the last period of time, has been seeking to put in place the necessary policies and the necessary legislation to address the matter. So here we're coming to, I hope, close to the final pieces of legislation that will put the jigsaw in place to deal with the problems that have been caused by the gratuitous and madness, if you like, that the Celtic Tiger instilled in the country. The expectation that this was going to go on forever, there would be a soft landing, all of this would play out, and that the bailout that was introduced, or the bank guarantee that was introduced in 2008, that we would end up, as it was said by the then Minister for Finance, the shortest bailout in the history of the world, not just of Ireland. So we're down now here to personal debt, personal insolvency and bankruptcy. This major reform of our personal insolvency and bankruptcy laws forms one part of a series of steps that the Government is taking to deal with the problem of unsustainable mortgage and personal debt, which affects households across the country and acts as a drag on the economy. The steps taken by the Government to assist with mortgage debt include increasing mortgage interest relief for people who bought their first home at the peak of the boom, fast-tracking personal bankruptcy reform to bring us into line with the best international standards, and directing mortgage providers in receipt of state support to present Government with plans for cost cutting. Furthermore, the Government has introduced the Mortgage to Rent scheme to assist people whose mortgage debts are unsustainable to stay in their home. And maybe just one example of that the Minister might, as he said to me before he left, when he would be reading all the transcripts, that he might just look into is an example of a case that I've been dealing with, where the mortgage to rent scheme seemed to me to be the ideal solution to the problem. But then it transpired that the cut-off point was put at 200,000 for qualification for the mortgage to rent scheme, and that the value of his particular home with his wife and 3 children, that it was valued as being over 200,000 and therefore could not avail for the mortgage to rent scheme. So that would seem to me to be a ceiling that might be adjustable in some way, and I would certainly ask the Minister to look at that carefully to see how this particular scheme, which I know has been of value to a number of people, might be extended to this particular person and others who might be deemed to be in the same situation. The Keane report of October 2011 recommended that, quote, the early introduction of new judicial and non-judicial bankruptcy options is vital, end of quote, and stated that, and I quote, without effective bankruptcy legislation, the mortgage arrears problem will not be resolved, end of quote. So this is, in many ways, the final implementation of the quality recommendations that were made in the Keane report, and I'm delighted to see that at last they are now being put in place. The reform of personal insolvency law contained in the bill will involve the introduction of the following new non-judicial debt resolutions processes. A debt relief notice to allow for the write-off of a qualifying debt of up to 20,000, subject to a 3-year supervision period. A debt settlement arrangement for the agreed settlement of unsecured debt over 5 years, and a personal insolvency arrangement for the agreed settlement of secured debt up to 3 million and unsecured debt over 6 years. And then furthermore, the final part of the package, the significant reform of the Bankruptcy Act 1988 that was begun in the Civil Law Miscellaneous Provisions Act 2011, that's also continued. But there's a very significant development is that the introduction of automatic discharge from bankruptcy after 3 years as opposed to 12 years as it is by law at the present time. This development moves Ireland to the European norm for such discharge and is most welcome. And I think that it is a better figure than, say, the 1 year, which is the norm with our neighbours, but this certainly, I think, is the right balance in these circumstances. The aim is to provide a modern insolvency process in Ireland that addresses the obligations of debtors and the rights of creditors in a proportionate and balanced way, taking into account the financial reality of an individual's true circumstances. These new personal insolvency laws should, in addition to providing new legal remedies, give a significant incentive for financial institutions to develop and implement realistic agreements to resolve debt issues with their customers. The provisions relating to a personal insolvency arrangement are specifically designed to facilitate a debtor's continued ownership and occupation of their home, unless the debtor does not wish to do so or the costs of the debtors continue to reside in it are disproportionately large. It should be noted that it is not possible to come to a non-judicial debt settlement between debtors and creditors. There is still the option of debt enforcement or judicial bankruptcy. I don't know whether I have time.
Just over a minute left.
I would like to discuss the provisions, but seeing that there isn't time to go through them in detail, can I say in conclusion that this legislation is a welcome piece of legislation. The mortgage holders out there and people with personal debt will welcome it as a means of resolving what would seem to have been an unresolvable or an insoluble problem. I would have liked to see this legislation on the statute books before now, but certainly all of the steps that have been taken to date have been taken with a view to reaching a solution to the crisis that befell us in the last number of years, and a lot of very solid steps have been taken in the right direction. This, to my mind, brings us virtually to the end of the road in the final steps towards solving the problem where people are unable in the present circumstances to meet the debts that they have incurred, and that they need to find a way forward with their own lives, with their families, and that for the economy as a whole will benefit substantially from the line being drawn in the sand and an opportunity for those people who are genuinely did their very best to make ends meet, to get on with their lives, to build the society here in this country, that now they're in a position to do so.